short of time also, but I'm not leaving my panelists without asking any of the questions which I've prepared for. And all men panel with just a woman, so be considerate. Let me start with that. Let me go to Mr. Bhushan first, sir. GSK globally has been decade-long bets on vaccines and biologics, absorbing years of uncertainty. In India, where pricing controls and quarterly pressures dominate, how do leaders justify protecting long-cycle science from short-term ROI expectations?
Thank you very much, Pratika. First of all, thank you very much to you, Vikas, the entire group, for putting together a very exciting day. I've enjoyed every session, especially the last one. Coming back to the question that you asked, and I'll answer that in two parts. One, as many of you may be aware, GSK has been listed here on the stock exchange from 1968. So with almost 60 years of experience of handling quarterly expectations, I'll give one more dimension to that response. I love the segue that Glenn had in the previous session, because I think the magic sauce that unites all of us in this industry is innovation. And innovation being the lifeline, the lifeblood of this industry. Restricting it to just the P&L cost and therefore living quarter by quarter is something that's always difficult. I think when you look at one element of the question that you asked in terms of pricing, we can't move away from the fact that in India, pricing will always be a critical aspect. If you look at our out-of-pocket expenditure, especially in medicines, it's significant. So I think our ability to therefore live with the reality of price controls and working within the remit of what the regulators propose every 4 years is a hard reality. I think within that remit, how do you therefore push the envelope and really stay invested in pursuing innovation? I think that really is the challenge. I'll give you some more data points. We are in the vaccines business at GSK. And if you look at India as a market, we produce and supply almost 60% of vaccines globally from India. But when you look at the $100 billion market of vaccines, India captures less than 2%. And that's because most of the value that we are capturing is on the low cost pediatric vaccine side, as opposed to really moving the needle on the innovation bit. I think if you have to therefore look at a couple of things, first is reframe that context. Look at pushing the envelope on innovation-led long cycle investments of 8, 10, 15 years, as it's not a binary question of whether you need to do this or that. It requires institutional courage across corporations, across regulators, across the government to really push that agenda. And I think that's something that's easier said than done, but that's the first one. And therefore it has to be seen as a national capacity building imperative. There can't be anything bigger than you heard in all the previous sessions. Moving from the pharmacy or the factory of the world to becoming the science hub of the world, that's the transition that will be required. And I think to a large extent, when I then look at it from the GSK angle, yes, we've had a difficult last few years, especially when we divested our consumer business, when we clearly stated our intent globally to be focused as a biopharmaceutical company. Every quarter, every year is not the same. So I think staying invested and committed to that long-term vision is absolutely critical. Even here in India, if after 60 years of being listed on the stock exchange, very often you move just because the market reacts violently even to a 100 basis point movement on the share price. And I think the whole ability therefore to educate and make the investors aware, that's where I think the second area is, the mind shift, and first one being really seeing this as an imperative for capacity building.
I think the opening batsman has set the tone well. Let's get rolling. Mr. Praveen, talking about AstraZeneca's global turnaround, which came from doubling down on science when returns were uncertain. So what does that journey tell Indian pharma companies that you should still prioritize predictable near-term results over scientific risk?
Yeah, thank you so much, Pratibha. And again, to what Bhushan was saying, fantastic sort of meeting so far. So I think, the question of whether you need to be short-term or long-term, or if that is even a choice, I think is predicated on a different choice you've already made. Because the first choice really that we have to decide on is that do we want to be an innovation-led or innovation-supported environment or not? Now, if you've said, and it looks like the thrust of all the conversation, I don't think it's up for debate anymore, that we do need to move towards innovation, right? Like everybody's aligned on it. Now, once you're aligned on it, then you have to do whatever it takes. And what it takes typically in innovation is that they are long cycles. That it does entail significant risk, especially in this field. So I think we'll have to really double down on this commitment to innovation. And then once you have committed to that, we have to be prepared to do what it takes, which is to be taking risks. And I think the journey that AstraZeneca has had is a great example of that, right? Over the last 12, 15 years, there's been tremendous innovation that has come through. In last year, for example, we had almost 70-80% of our phase 3s that have come through. But they were all premised on this culture of taking risks, really putting science at the forefront, and not business. Because ultimately, where we bring value as an industry is innovation, right? So you have to start with science. And once you lead with science, and the science in the context of drug discovery is long-term, and it does take a lot of risk, I think what we believe is that business will follow, that you will do well over the longer term.
Yeah, let me go to Dr. Mahesh. Sir, what are the real inflection points where discovery programs are the most at risk? Is it scientific uncertainty, challenges in demonstrating early clinical or pharmaceutical viability, or the difficulty of sustaining long-term capital and organized patients? I think there's too much of ingredients to it.
Yeah, I think your question has been pretty long, but just to put you, there is nothing like a single inflection point in a discovery, okay? The most important point which kind of predetermines your ultimate outcome, according to the experience which we have gathered at WOCAD, is that if you ensure at every stage that your research project has a fundamental clinical viability and pharmaceutical viability, then you create a situation where you are likely to come out with a success. And as you progress further from one stage to another, that confidence goes on building further. But I think it is very fundamental that any discovery project is based on these fundamental foundations, I call it, the clinical viability, and there are ways to ascertain this. The people who are engaged in discovery, they are thoroughly familiar how to do this, but doing it at an early stage, I think, helps you avoid the late stage failure, which are very expensive.
Let me go to Dr. Sridhar. So let's talk about innovation R&D now. Despite ambition to be a global innovation hub, Indian pharma R&D spend remains conservative. You might differ. Is this a capital market problem, a leadership mindset issue, or a structural fear of long-term risk?
First of all, Pratibha, thanks for having me here and asking me the toughest question on the panel, right? I think I don't want to dwell on what was the past, but if I look at the last few hours of this session, the leadership mindset is very clear, that innovation is going to be at the forefront for India. The ability to take risk is going to increase. The ability of the government and the regulator to support such a risk taking, I think, is really phenomenal. I think what I've been as part of this journey right from the days of Glenmark, when 2004 forest deal happened, to to date, and it's been a phenomenal innovation journey in India, and the learning has been tremendous. We have the skill sets, we have the right atmosphere, we have the right mindset. I think all of these ingredients put together is going to change the way India looks at innovation and India does innovation. And I'm very sure that when we look at 2047, which was what Glenn was alluding to as the landmark year for Viksit Bharat, I think one of the messages that we've been constantly over the last year pushing from the IPA side is 100 drugs from India by 100 years of independence. And I don't think that that's going to be a tough challenge. I think we should up that number, go from more than 100, I would say the pipeline is getting bigger and bigger, and there's much more that is happening in the innovation space in India.
You handled it well, lot of positive vibes. Let me go to the technology person here. We are talking about innovation since morning. Sagar, AI-led innovation doesn't deliver linear ROI. I may be wrong. So, do you see Indian pharma treating AI as a cost-saving tool rather than a long-term discovery engine because of short-term return expectations?
Thanks for having me here, first of all, RE-Pharma. I think from the conversation and the work which we have been doing with a lot of pharma lately, the conversation and the work is about long-term thinking. And I think we might be lucky enough with our partners, but I think the leaders of today understand that AI is a long game. And there are matrices, but the time spent to measure those metrics is a bit longer. Obviously, long-term benefits are being calculated, but it's fair, right? You are making investments, you need to understand how this will pan out. For example, our work in early lung cancer space with AstraZeneca has been about policy and has been about stage shift rather than short-term ROI thinking, right? And we have been deploying across states, and it has been a humbling experience for us because you cannot overwhelm the already burdened system, right? And you have to make the top-down and bottom-up alignment. You have to set the right protocols. You have to work with the clinicians, not just produce AI, but make sure that it sits ambiently in the workflows, right? So that is what it is, and I think thinking AI is a cost-saving tool will only give linear and limited returns. When you think about long-term and think about patient outcomes, that is where you build capacity, and that is where I think AI will compound.
Okay, let me talk to Mr. Siddharth. Let's take the investor's perspective here. So from an investor's perspective, Indian pharma has been rewarded for earnings visibility and punished for uncertainty. Are capital markets genuinely biased against long cycle innovation, or have companies failed to articulate the value of risk well enough?
Thanks, Pratibha. Thanks for this opportunity. I think it's a bit of both. While there's no running away from the fact that investors like certainty of cash flows, earnings growth, stable businesses, but I think there's also a function of the maturity of the markets, right? Indian markets are not at a stage where I think science and binary outcomes can be really plugged into an Excel model, which is what investors typically use to value companies. So it's an evolving process. And on the other side, I do believe that in the past, the anecdotal evidence has not really been very encouraging. We've had some tall promises, some false starts, timelines which just kept stretching, regulatory pathways which were very uncertain. But I believe that we are at a point where there is a convergence. Simply because the growth is coming at a premium for the pharma companies. I don't think growth is as easy as it was, let's say, 10 years back. And Indian pharma has always been valued by the investors at very lofty valuations, right? Given the current growth trajectory, I believe it will be very difficult to sustain those kind of valuations unless there is an investment which goes into long-term capital and long-term R&D. So I think in a nutshell, what I would believe is we are at a convergence point where we have moved from a utopian world where we felt these two will never meet to more of an ideal world where I think there are milestones which we can see, especially with the recent successes, where I think investors and the companies are coming to a more common ground.
Yeah, my next set of questions would be around the union budget. We were very happy to see the finance minister in a starting of the budget only she mentioned about health and pharma. We were really happy. This never happens, rarely happens. So Mr. Bhushan, I wanted to know about the budget's Biopharma Shakti initiative, which is designed for long cycle biologics innovation in a market driven by near-term performance metrics. How does GSK evaluate whether such policy supports genuinely de-risks long-term science in India? Do you think so?
Sure. That's a great question, and I'm going to use Siddharth's response as a segue, because if you just put one more data point there, Look at the big pharma, the global pharmaceutical companies, and look at their R&D spends. They're typically in the range of 20 to 28% of their top line revenues. And if you look at even the largest Indian companies, they would probably be in the range of anywhere between 7 to 10. The best ones are in the range of 8 to 10. And that's still not enough. So obviously, if you want to now compete in the global pool and potentially have the next 100 molecules coming from India by 2047, you need more firepower, you need more fuel, and I think that's where these announcements in the budget are really inspiring. For those who may not be aware, the Shakti is an acronym. The KTI in that Biotech Shakti program stands for Knowledge, Technology and Innovation. So to a large extent, I think this sets the tone for creating the ecosystem. What will it take for the industry in general to make that transition across the board? Now obviously, when you ask me that question, how does GSK or like-minded companies like ours see this? I think there's a lot of pragmatic optimism, because we've seen some great schemes and programs like the PLI, like the PRIP, and I think on top of all of that, having this 10,000 crore fund available really helps shape the ecosystem. What will have to be seen is that this fund doesn't get used only for manufacturing upgrades, but really gets funneled into phase 1, phase 2 trials, because that's where the magic will happen. Your clinical research really is a function. I keep saying 100,000 new jobs have got created in India in the last 10 years with global capability centers, which are launched by many multinationals. So except for wet chemistry, wet labs, a lot of good work is happening there. Hopefully, this should also, the second point is, this fund should help forge new alliances between global pharma. You heard in the fantastic trialogue earlier, Mr. Shangvi was saying that there were so many companies, including ours, that used to have R&D centers in India. Today, nobody is really doing basic research or early R&D here. And I think that's the second area. I think this fund will definitely unlock a lot of value there. Concurrently, I think the announcement around having 1,000 centers, the clinical sites for really accelerating the launches speaks volumes about the ambition around accelerating the regulatory pathways, because obviously if you want to swim in that ocean, you will really have to accelerate a lot around the regulatory pathways. Again, we'll have to see how this goes along with in terms of ICH and good clinical practices. How do we have a standard which is really aligned with what we see from from global frameworks like the US FDA or EMA for that matter. So I think there are a couple of things which are important, but the biggest one is this going to help us solve the capital problem? And I think to a large extent, if you have the right checks and balances, I see this as a great opportunity to really catapult ourselves as an industry.
Yeah. So, as Mr. Bhushan said, Mr. Praveen, with the budget strengthening, clinical trial infrastructure and advanced research talent, what mindset shift, I think Mr. Bhushan has partly answered, mindset shift would Indian boards need to make for these policy signals to translate into sustained innovation rather than an incremental gain?
So first of all, I think let's acknowledge that the government is really taking a lot of steps in the direction of enabling innovation, supporting pharmaceutical sort of access in the country. So that's something to be certainly applauded. I think the second part is that when you think about clinical trials, right? For example, for our own company, we do the vast majority of our clinical trials, phase 3 trials in India now. That was not the case even a few years ago. And what we're realizing is that you've got a tremendous sort of clinician pool, you've got some really good sort of facilities, but the question is how do you expand beyond the tier 1? So I think that's where one of the elements that was provided would make sense. The other part of it is that, and I think a key thing, the big picture that we'll have to think about is what is the signal that the government is sending in the context of innovation, right? And clearly there's some positive signals, and it's important to continue to reinforce, because one way to look at it is that we want innovation to be done in India, which I think we're all aligned on. But But that is not the same as saying we want innovation to be done only by Indian companies, right? Which is a very different lens. So I think what we need to do is that we need to foster a culture of innovation, bring global and Indian companies to be able to collaborate together so that you're able to bring the know-how that exists in the global landscape to be able to actually support and accelerate, which is exactly what's happened in China. Support and accelerate the innovation sort of ecosystem within the country. So I would say that there are a few moving pieces. They're moving in the right direction. I think we need to really accelerate that and really be mindful of every step and what signal it is sending to the global community, whether it's the global pharmaceutical community or the investor community, on what sort of a landscape we are looking to create in India in this context.
Yeah. Let me go to Dr. Mahesh again with a discovery question. Public investment can improve infrastructure, but discovery still demands patience. So does Budget 2026 meaningfully changing the survival odds of long horizon drug discovery programs, or does short-term ROI pressure remains the biggest threat?
Again, a very complex question. I think to build a discovery culture, unless it is, patience is of course a very basic ingredient in that. And the patience is required both at the scientist team level as well as at the whichever organization is supporting that kind of endeavor. So it is not going to be short term, but I think what is required for a innovation cycle to get perpetualized in India, I think we need to create multiple teams which are engaged in the discovery research. What we have seen, unfortunately, over the last 10 years or so, many of the Indian pharma companies, they had to close down their discovery effort. I mean, that was a very sorry development which has happened, but I think we have to put that unfortunate past at the back and must make a new beginning by creating a number of teams which can sustain discovery over a long period of time, because it takes a patience.
Okay.
Yeah.
So let me go to Dr. Sridhar. I hope this will not be difficult. The budget acknowledges innovation but stops short of fundamentally reshaping incentives. Should future policy tweaks explicitly reward long-term scientific risk over fast return generics? And how can IPA push that shift? Like associations like this.
So I think it's important to have a good mix of both the long term and the short term. While the generics is our bread and butter, innovation is going to give us that incremental leap. And I think it's important from that perspective to start investing in innovation today for you to be able to see the results 20, 25 years down the road. How do organizations like IPA help? I think we work very closely with the government in shaping some of these policies, in bringing about, I think the IPA as an organization worked very closely with the DOP on the PREP scheme. We've been working very closely with the ANRF team, the Department of Science and Technology, DBT, on various of these government grant schemes. We're working very closely with VC community to see how we can encourage VC investment in the startup ecosystem. And Glenn alluded to this as part of his conversation, was it's not enough only for the Indian pharma to be strengthened. We need that startup ecosystem, which is not only for doing the innovative research, but also all the allied services that come along with that to be strengthened. I think organizations like IPA play a very important role in building that ecosystem. And we are very happy to be part of the innovation journey.
Yeah. So let me go to Mr. Sagar. The budget push for clinical and research infrastructure will bring in massive data value. So will pharma use this to build long-term AI-driven discovery platforms, or will AI still be forced to justify itself on quarterly ROI metrics?
Interesting. I think obviously the signs are really good from the ministry itself that they are thinking about R&D and clinical research, because it's foundational, right? India has huge population and our epidemiology is very different, right? So we'll see a lot of phase 3, phase 4 clinical trials coming up just because of quality of evidence and local relevance, right? And I think Dr. Visala in the morning said that we'll be setting up uh, ethical bodies and we'll be setting up clinical trials set up. I think this is the point where we have to start thinking innovation first and AI first. Because all the matured ethical bodies or clinical trial sites are already established, and doing a rejig or implementing something new would be difficult versus we are just starting off. And that will generate a lot of leverage for India to lead the clinical trial space. And in terms of building platforms, I think there are two ways to look at it. In clinical trials, there are certain things where AI can help. One is obviously with recruitment, workflows, screen failure rates and all of that, which can be looked at from a short-term perspective. But when we think long-term, I think I see a lot of value with big data, because with big data comes rare patterns, right? And we are seeing that with radiomics, you can actually dynamically track drug response, then periodically track it, right? So I think using AI to innovate and like use it for iterations, for faster iterations, it'll be much more important to think deep and not think from a just one clinical trial perspective. So build something which can get repetitive and get results in multiple clinical trials and is relevant after 10 years as well.
Okay, let me quickly go to Mr. Siddharth. As the budget signals long-term intent through biopharma, Shakti and research infrastructure, but capital doesn't move on intent alone. So what specific proof points would investors need to start valuing Indian pharma companies beyond near-term cash flows?
Yes, I think it was an important step, biopharma Shakti, but my sense is it was more aimed towards early adoption of biosimilars, where I think even the government recognizes that we are a bit too late, and globally pharma has moved towards a very different treatment modality. So I think given the intent is more towards biosimilars, I feel the early indications would be how companies are fast tracking their biosimilar programs, how many approvals are coming on the biosimilar, because those are the low-hanging fruits which this particular regulation anyways tries to address. But yeah, on the long term and the medium term, I think the clear milestones would be, how deep are the R&D pipelines. Globally, big pharma, as you would know, don't really kind of put all their eggs in one basket, right? They are quite hedged in terms of their R&D pipeline, and therefore I think the depth of the pipeline would be a good indicator. And last but not the least, I believe ultimately everything will be measured on ROI eventually by the markets. And to that extent, it's not just about how commercially successful it is, but how is it getting validated. So for example, licensing partnership with global big pharma would be an indication that the move is in the right direction.
So we are having some 10 minutes, but so I would like to ask one final question to all of them. I would want in pointers, like if you want to give in 2 to 3 pointers. Mr. Bhushan, I'll go with you first. If we revisit this discussion in 2030, what would convince you that Indian pharma truly broke free from short-term ROI thinking and become a global innovation force?
I think the first one would be the number of molecules coming out of India. Without doubt. I think you have some great examples already that were shared earlier this morning. But for the for the size of our nation, the might that we represent, that number is absolutely inadequate. So I think the first one would be have at least, like you have at least 75 to 100 antibody drug conjugates coming out of China. What should that number be for us? Because we have everything here. So that's the first one. Second one would be a credible focus on forging alliances and partnerships, because what big pharma can get into India, like probably for 30-40 years ago, a large part of the supply chain competence was set up because of, for example, we are in the second century of our operations. Glaxo was set up here 101 years back, right from our manufacturing. We are probably the first example of Make in India. What will it take for us to get back our innovate in India model here and forge those alliances? So that would be the second one. I mean, a third one would be from a regulatory standpoint, really have accelerated timelines, move away from just policies to actual execution on the ground, and see how we are moving across the value chain much faster. So those three would be top for me.
Mr. Ravi.
Yeah, I think, so just building off on what Bhushan was saying, clearly the other part would be that how can we differentiate what we bring? So, for example, where AI-driven R&D and outcomes of that become much more evident, and we have we've carved out a leadership in that space. That would be one example. The second is that really fostering the ecosystem. So if you think about it, how many, a very tangible thing could be that how many key scientists from across the world who are of Indian origin have come back to India to start a small biotech or to work within the research-driven ecosystem in India, because ultimately it is intellectual property. So you do need that intellectual capital. So now it's either through universities, which I think will take some time for us to really build to that level, but also we've got some great scientists of Indian origin across the world. And how do we make this attractive for them to come? And finally, I think really building the collaboration ecosystem where it is very clear that innovation is rewarded. Because the only way, it's one thing to speak about it, but the proof of the pudding would be when we demonstrate that innovation is actually valued and rewarded. And so that has to be coherent across all of the different policies that we have.
Dr. Mahesh, your 3 pointers.
Yeah, I will continue on my theme that by that period, if we can see that there are multiple teams which are created here to do the true innovation in terms of discovery and not just the reverse engineering. Plus, I also expect that in coming years, at least a couple of big pharma decides to take up an innovation purely in India by training Indian manpower and scientists. Because unless we train and create a critical mass of people who understand the discovery nuances, the AI is not going to help just by itself. You will require first a human intelligence. I give still a much higher importance to the HI over AI. In order to leverage AI, first you have to have a human intelligence created, and for that a critical mass has to be created. I hope by that period, I think we have sufficient human intelligence created.
Yeah. Dr. Sridhar, quick points.
So from an IPA perspective, I think we believe in making action, and I'll just give you a couple of examples of how IPA has really fostered an innovation ecosystem in India today. Right? IPA as an organization is one of the members of an organization called IAIRO, which is the Indian AI Research Organization, embracing AI technology for pharma across the board, not only just for innovation, but also looking at applications of AI for manufacturing, quality, clinical trials, all of it. We are partners with an organization called CPI UK, which is bringing in innovative processes to the Indian manufacturing sector. We are looking at a lot of industry academia collaboration. One of the examples is setting up the Page Institute in Ahmedabad, right, which is for pharmaceutical academy for global excellence, and that is creating the talent pool that will be required to make the Indian industry much more competitive in the global landscape. So from an IPA perspective, I think if you were to look at a conversation 10 years down the road, all of these investments that are being made today, I think would have started yielding fruit, and this conversation would be about how we are embracing technology to actually build on that innovation.
Quick pointers, please.
I think we have to start pushing for digitization a lot more than what we are right now, because I think once that data gets generated, I definitely concur with Bhushan that we can generate a lot of molecules right in India itself. We need not.
You promised you.
Yeah. So I think that's possible with digitization, with data, with innovation. So I think we have to have that mindset and really act upon it.
Yeah, Mrs. Siddharth.
So I think from an investor and market standpoint, maybe just a couple of pointers. I think how are companies going to report? So is there going to be a separate reporting of their R&D investments? Because so far there has been an information asymmetry as far as R&D investments go. And the second point would be, I think, in the face of an earnings pressure or earnings cut, does the R&D is the first branch to be cut? If the R&D is sustainable and the funding for the R&D continues on a sustainable, I think we've crossed that Rubicon where we can believe that innovation is going to be a sustainable.
So we are not over yet. So let's do our rapid fire. So this is a very interesting segment. I have 3 questions to each speakers. So one word, yes or no, or if you think you don't want to answer it, you can skip. If you skip, I will come back again and again to you. And there's no hamper. Mr. Bhushan, again you first. So this is a fill in the blank question. India is a great market for GSK, but when it comes to discovery, we are still mainly a dash. What is that? If you had to fill it up. You have to be quick.
Yet to be discovered.
Okay. The next is true or false. No, that lenience we'll give. One word, it's okay. If an India-led discovery project misses numbers for 3 quarters, it still survives inside a global MNC. True or false?
Bold no.
Okay. So one word you have to say. What scares boards more? Scientific failure or investor reaction? Siddharth is here with me.
Candid answer, investor reaction.
You have to note that. Okay, next let me go to Mr. Praveen. So you have to finish the sentence for me. If Indian Pharma copied one thing from AstraZeneca's turnaround, it should be?
Being science-led.
Being first is a little tough, I know. Safe blockbuster today or risky breakthrough 10 years later? Which will you? Sorry. Safe blockbuster today or risky breakthrough 10 years later? Which will you choose?
Always the breakthroughs.
Safe you are. Okay, now you have to take an honest take. No, India isn't ready for innovation. Fact or convenient excuse?
Definitely not a fact. It is an excuse. But I don't even think it's an excuse. So
No,
can I have a third choice?
You have chosen. Let me go to Dr. Mahesh. Discovery programs in India die more often because of bad science or bad patience. I don't want that. I want an answer.
I think discovery science dies because we have not created, let me give you a very broad answer.
No,
we
I
have
don't
not
want
created
rapid
a
fire.
broad culture. See what has happened, there is such an overhang of generic success. And that overhang is still haunting us.
So it's a bad science.
Yeah. So I mean, generic businesses taught us, made us a master of reverse engineering. But at the same time, it has delayed the learning of skill sets required for discovery.
This lenience I'm not giving you in the next 2 questions. Okay, one word answer. The hardest thing to convince an Indian board about discovery is?
Yeah, I mean, the
One word answer. Just one word.
you have to show the very convincing evidence that your discovery project is moving in the right direction.
Okay. This is easy. Yes or no. Does Indian Pharma panic too early when discovery doesn't pay back fast?
I think not necessarily always. I mean, I myself mentioned that 6 or 7 companies closed down, but
You are not understanding a rapid fire, Dr. Mahesh.
not always, I think.
Okay, fine. Yeah, you can finish it. Okay. Done? Let's. Dr. Sridhar is very eager. Huh? So, quick pick, sir. India's innovation problem is more policy or mindset?
Mindset.
No, you're trained so well. The most overused word in Indian pharma innovation discussion is, you just don't want this in the dictionary.
Funding.
Siddharth,
Lack
everybody's
of it.
targeting you here. Next is yes or no. Are incentives today accidentally rewarding short-term thinking? Yes or no?
Yes.
Sure is. Okay, let's go to Sagar. It's a quick reality check I want to do. AI in pharma today is driving efficiency or entirely new science?
I think both.
Both. Can't be so safe. Okay, let's do a fill in the blank now. India risks becoming the world's back office for AI unless we start owning?
I think the IP, right? It's not.
You have to go back to office. I understand. Thanks. Yes or no? Are pharma companies still treating data as support material rather than core IP?
No.
You can't give the answers, Chakravarti ji. Like you are helping them. Yes.
No.
No. Okay. Now, Mr. Siddharth. Again, to the investor's lens, Indian pharma valuation reward predictability or innovation?
Caveat, I don't speak for all investors. Predictability.
Oh my God. Finish this for me. Capital will fund long gestation science in India, or capital will fund long gestation science in India only when?
Strong governance systems.
Okay. I need a straight answer for this. This is the last one, so make it as lively and energetic as possible. Do markets punish companies that talk too much about discovery? Dr. Mahesh is there again for you. You can't think so much. No answers from there.
I don't think they value the I would say discourse on discovery. They value it only on the basis of results.
Thank you so much, gentlemen. It was nice talking to you all.